Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ashton College's Spring Alumni event. My name is Christy Katanko, and I am the Student Success Coordinator here. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Catherine Antony with us today. She is a renowned health professional and educator with a heart for empowering others. Dr. Antony brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to her work. With a strong foundation in healthcare and a master's of education specializing in administration, leadership, and policy. Today, Catherine will be sharing her expertise with us on the topic of professional growth, using self-awareness and behavioral insights to improve work habits. Drawing from her extensive experience in education and healthcare, she will provide valuable insights and practical strategies to help you cultivate greater awareness, enhance your professional skills, and achieve success in your personal and professional lives. Please join us in welcoming her this evening.
Thank you, Christy.
You're welcome. We're glad to have you here, Catherine.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and then we'll go from there. Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Antony, and it's really nice to be here, especially as a part of Ashton Alumni community. And there's something meaningful about these spaces, right? Because we are all at different points in our journeys, but still connected through a shared experience. And when we come together for this kind of conversation, it turns into the topic of growth, what we are learning, what we are heading, and what is next in our careers. But today, what I would focus is a slightly different side of professional growth, not just the big milestones, but the everyday patterns behind them. How we work, how we respond to our day, and the small habits that would shape our experience over time. And more specifically, I'll be looking into self-awareness and simple behavioral insights that can help us improve our work habits in a way that actually would stick with us. So when we talk about professional growth, we often focus on external things. That's the first thing which would come onto your mind. We'll talk about new skills, certifications, opportunities, or even career progression. And don't get me wrong, those are very important. But a large part of how we grow professionally is shaped by something much more everyday, how we work. Things like how we manage our time, how we respond to pressure, how we can stay focused, how we deal with interruptions, especially in this current digital environment, or even how we recover when things don't go as we plan. And these are all part of our daily work habits. And most of us already know what we should be doing. Most of us don't struggle because we don't know what we do. We struggle because we can't seem to do it consistently. So we plan our day, we set routines, we try to stay focused. But somewhere between that intention and action, things don't always go as we expect. We have tried to be organized, more consistent, more productive. But the challenge is not always knowing what to do, but it's sustaining these habits over time, especially in real work environments that can be very demanding and unpredictable. So over time, we would think this is a discipline problem. So that's where we are going to crack it today and see it's not just that. So what I have been exploring is that our work habits is not just about discipline. They're shaped by how we think, how we respond to our work, and the environments which can shape that. Both through the experience and through exploring behavioral science, is that our work habits are not just a result of discipline or intention. They're shaped both by how we think and how we respond internally and the external system or the environment we are a part of. So in this session, we are going to look into all this through the professional growth, through this lens I was talking about, and using self-awareness and behavioral insights. So the goal is not to add more to us, but to help us understand what we already know about work and how we can adjust that in a way which feels more sustainable and realistic. So the first core idea I would talk about before getting into anything deeper is that to start very simple. So most of us already know what we should be doing at work. We plan our day, right? We set priorities. We tell ourselves we'll stay focused. Maybe we'll tell ourselves we'll avoid distractions, manage our time better. But if we are honest, there is always some gap we would notice. A gap between what we intend to do and what we actually end up doing. And this is not occasional, it happens quite consistently. You start a day with a plan, and somewhere along the way, things can shift. You can get pulled with emails. You can switch between tasks. Something urgent might come up. So sometimes, even without major reason, you just don't follow through the way or what you have planned. And over time, it's very easy to interpret the fact that this gap is a personal issue. Like maybe you would think, I need to be more disciplined, more focused. But what if this gap is not random? What if there is a pattern behind it? And more importantly, what if there are underlying factors that is shaping this gap beyond just the effort or intention? Let me give you an example so that this makes more sense, because I have seen this on my own work. So I start a day with a clear plan, but within the first hour, I will be already responding to my messages, emails, and small tasks. But by the end of the day, I seem to be very busy, but not necessarily productive. And it's easy to think I did not manage my time well. But if I look closer, it's not just about time management. It can be a combination of my automatic behavior, the constant interruptions I might be getting during my work, and how the workday was being structured. So a lot of behavior is not always a conscious choice. So if this gap between intention and action is not random, what's actually driving it? That's a real question here. One of the key things behavioral science shows us that a lot of how we work is not fully conscious. We like to think that we are making deliberate decisions throughout the day, that we are choosing what we want to do or what we have to focus on, how to work, and what to prioritize. But in reality, a large part of our behavior is automatic. It's driven by patterns, habits, and responses that we have repeated over time. For example, if you open up your laptop in the morning, you may have planned to start with a priority task. But what's the first thing you would do? You would end up checking your email. Not because you consciously decided that was the most important thing, but it becomes a part of your pattern, which is what we say that it's automatic. Or let's say you're working on something that needs focus. You get a notification or you feel the urge to check something quickly. So you switch between tasks. Again, this is not always a conscious decision. It just happens. And this becomes even more visible when you're tired or under pressure. You don't carefully think enough through every step. You don't fall back on what is unfamiliar, but you fall back on what is familiar, what is easier to, and what you have done before. That's your brain trying to conserve your effort. So when we look at the gap we spoke about earlier, it's not just about lack of that discipline. It's often because of our behavior, which is being driven by these automatic patterns. And unless we become aware of that, we would keep repeating it, even when they don't help us. So this is where self-awareness becomes very important. Not in a general sense, but in a very practical way. Being able to notice what are the patterns I end up doing. What do I automatically do during my workday? What are the patterns I fall into, especially when I'm distracted or when I'm under pressure? Because once you start noticing that patterns, you are no longer just reacting. You will start observing. So that's the first step, which is simply noticing these patterns in your own day. And having that self-awareness does matter, because unless you start observing yourself, you can't make a change. As I mentioned in the beginning, you should also check your environment because your environment and system, they shape your behavior as well. So now that we understand that behavior is automatic, the next question is, what are the things which would influence that? So we often assume they come from us, our personality, our habits, our discipline. But behavioral science shows us something important, which is that our environment plays a huge role in shaping how we would behave. So think about a typical workday, the tools you might be using, like notifications you're receiving, the expectation around a response time for your task, the way you would structure your task or your work. All of these are constantly influencing what you would do. So if your day is filled with constant notifications like emails, messages, updates, even if you want to focus, your work naturally becomes a reactive manner. Not because you are lacking discipline, but because your environment is training you to respond. So if your workload is high and time is limited, you may start taking shortcuts, rushing through tasks, not because you don't care, because your system is pushing you in that direction. So even something simple as how your task is structured or organized, everything sometimes feels urgent. So your brain doesn't prioritize, it just starts reacting. So when you look at your work habits, they are not just a reflection of who we are. They are also a reflection of the system we are working. And this is where, again, we should connect to self-awareness because it's not about what are my habits, it's also about what is my environment encouraging me to do, especially without me realizing it. Because your workflow is not neutral. It is constantly shaping your behavior. So that brings us to a very important framework I would like to talk about. So there are three areas you should think about: your work, your behavior, your workforce, and workplace. So let's connect these ideas together. So we have seen the basic idea of that. So we have seen that a lot of our behavior is automatic and our environment is playing a big role in shaping it. So instead of looking at our work habits as just as a personal issue, it helps to look at them from two sides. So one side, we have you, right? What you bring into your work. This includes your energy, your focus, your habits. It can be how you respond to a time frame or a pressure, how you think and process information. And this is what we call the workforce side, the internal side. On the other side, we have the workplace, which includes the system you work in, the tools you would be using, your workload, the expectations you would be having, interruptions, and the overall structure of your workday. And that's the external side. So when you connect these and your work habits, these are not just coming from one of these. They are a result of the interaction between these two. And that's really important to understand. So what actually shows up in your day, your behavior, is shaped by how you function and the environment you're working in. So you can actually say that behavior is a bridge between these two. So if you're someone who can focus well, but your environment is full of interruptions, your behavior automatically becomes reactive. Not because you can't focus, but because the system is not supporting you. Or if your environment is well structured, but you're mentally exhausted, that is another way. That's another perspective we can talk about. You may still struggle to follow through. So you should have that balance between these two. So when we look at this model, improving the work habits is not just about changing what we do. It starts with understanding what is already happening. And that's where self-awareness comes in. Not in a general sense, but in a very practical way. So when you're able to notice what patterns do I fall during my workday, when do I lose focus, what kind of situations make my work easier or harder, these things will help you, because if we don't notice these patterns, we keep trying to fix the outcome without understanding what is driving these patterns. So the good news is that these patterns are not fixed. Because if behavior is shaped by patterns and environment, it definitely means that these can be adjusted. not through big changes, but through small, consistent shifts. So let's see what are the things you can do practically in an application level so that this can be made to work in your daily life. So as I said, small changes in both your behavior and environment can improve these work habits. So once we start looking at work habits in that way, not just as a discipline, but as a combination of how we function and the environment we are in, the question becomes, what can we actually change? And the answer is not everything. We don't always have full control over our workplace, right? When we work in a particular environment, we can't control everything. But we do have some control over how we structure our own work and how we respond to it. So you will start from there. So the first thing you can do is reduce the cognitive overload. Our brain has limited capacity. When there are too many things that are competing for attention, the focus naturally drops. So let's start with attention. So brain, we do often say we can multitask, but the brain cannot truly multitask. What it actually does is it is switching between the tasks very quickly, and every switch comes with a cost. So every interruption breaks your attention. And when documentation or whatever you're doing between your work happens in these fragmented moments, we start seeing the same patterns. You might end up missing details. You might use, maybe if you're doing something like a documentation, you might use vague language. You would see a copy-paste behavior. So this is how we try to cope up. And we would casually say this is multitasking. But what is happening there is you're getting interrupted and you're actually breaking your attention. And if you look at the working memory of our brain, which can actually load only about 4 to 7 items at once. And that's it. Sounds very little, right? When working memory gets overloaded, the brain makes a very predictable choice. It prioritizes finishing the task over being precise. And this is not a knowledge gap. It is actually a capacity issue. And this is our capacity. When we look into our brain again with the memory under stress, which is something which is very unreliable. So when we are going through stress, it changes how our memory works. Under time pressure, for example, memory gets weaker. So when work is done at the end of the day, the brain is not recalling. It's actually trying to reconstruct. So when it reconstructs, it fills in gap with defaults or the familiar phrases we are often using. That's what happens. So the cognitive load what we have is actually amplifying the stress. And this is where neuroscience gives us clarity instead of blaming. So even well-educated professionals fail to act perfectly when the working memory is overloaded, when the attention is divided, and the time pressure is high. Let's look at an example. So instead of trying to manage everything at once, what you can do here is you can simplify. Focus on one task at a time. Or you can break your work into smaller parts, reducing unnecessary switching between tasks. So when you understand the physiology which is happening in your brain, you're actually helping yourself so that you can perform well. So this is not about working harder. It's about working with how your brain would function. So instead of the mindset, I could handle everything, you have to put it in a different structure, like one task at a time. So for example, when you're on a call and you're fully on the call, as soon as the call ends, and if your work demands to document, you don't go and touch your email in between. You're not multitasking there, you are sequencing. So you have to do one thing at a time. That is one way you can help with the cognitive overload. Another way is to break work into smaller parts. So don't think that I need to finish all documentation or all my work today. That's actually very heavy. Instead of that, if you had a call to attend, document that one, then go to the next one. So now each task is small, but you can feel that it is finishable, and you're actually helping your brain feel that you're rewarded for that. You can reduce unnecessary switching. So you can create specific windows. Like you can structure in a way like I will do the calls and documentation together. You can set a time for your emails, like emails only at 11:30 to 3:30. So you're not bouncing around, you're creating a structure which is helping you to have a specific window. So you're doing one thing, but not giving a multitask level so that you feel more productive at the end of the day rather than feeling like I was just busy the whole day. So what changes is that you stop carrying unfinished tasks in your head. You make fewer errors because it's fresh, and you feel less mentally scattered. Reducing the friction. This is another strategy you can use, which is a way of making your behavior easier. So we tend to follow the path of least resistance. So small changes in how work is structured can make a big difference. So reducing friction is not just about making things easier in general. It's about being very intentional with what you make easier and what you can make harder. So if everything is easy, nothing is actually changing. So think of it like this. You want to study more. You're relying on motivation, leaving your notes open, your laptop charged, desk clean. Starting should feel like automatic. So if you keep procrastinating, you have probably made distraction frictionless, like your phone in your hand, your apps on one tap away, because that's how our world is right now. There is no barriers for you. So the real move is lower that friction for the behavior you want to lean on to. So increasing friction for the behavior you don't. Let me try to put it in a very relatable example. So if your phone is right next to you while you're working, you're not lacking discipline there. You have designed an environment where distraction is an easier option for you. It's the easiest option there. But if your phone is in another room, suddenly the focus is not very heroic, it's just the default. So where people mess this up is that we try to fight that behavior with our willpower instead of redesigning the setup. I know it's easier to say than to be done. So don't just say that I can reduce the friction. What you can ask yourself is, what specific action am I making easier for me tomorrow? It is starting from tomorrow. So for example, if your priority task is hard to start, like you're starting your work tomorrow and your task is something which is hard to start, we'll automatically have a tendency to avoid it. But if you break it into clear first step, it becomes easier to begin, right? So, or if your distractions are easily available, as a previous example, you will naturally have a tendency to go towards them. So reducing those small triggers would help you to actually begin with these changes. Let me give you one more example to see how we can reduce friction, because it's very theoretically fine, but you have to practically put it in these applications. So for example, we have work emails which can pile up. So the typical situation is that it's piling up and it's giving you high friction there. So you open up an email and you can read it, think, okay, I'll reply later, or leave it unread or flagged. You move on. You're going to repeat it quite a few times there. Now you have created a second job to yourself, rereading, redeciding, and that is actually friction. So in this situation, how do you actually reduce the friction? You can open up the email, decide immediately, what am I going to do with this? Reply, delegate, or archive. So keep like a 3 to 4 reusable reply templates. So you have a template for like scheduling, acknowledging, or follow-up. Set a rule. If it takes less than 2 minutes, you're going to respond right away. Keep your inbox view simple, not 20 folders, just a few clear ones. So these sounds very simple strategies, but this is actually helping you to work more smarter. Now, replaying is You might, if you had the previous way of doing things, you're replaying it, you're rereading it, you're redeciding it, and you're literally creating more work to you. Now, replaying is not a tax, and you will get into it. It's a natural step when you do things like this. So you can create low friction responses. You can open, reply immediately using a quick structure. So when you are doing something like that, you're actually done in 30 seconds. So there is no mental load you're carrying forward. How do we create these cues and structure? This is one very good strategy you can do to make that behavioral changes. So behavior often follows some cues. So when something becomes predictable, it becomes easier to repeat, like setting a consistent time for focused work, grouping similar tasks together, or creating a simple routine for how we start our day. These are small things, but they reduce the decision making. Preparing for meetings. So a meeting can pop up and you join, spend the first few minutes thinking about, okay, what exactly this meeting is about, figuring out what is it about, opening up the files, catching up mentally. That itself is very exhausting. You have been becoming more reactive every time. So you can create a simple structure for this. You make a queue, which is like 5 minutes before any meeting. I'll open up the link and see what is the agenda for that meeting, or check the last message or last email related to that meeting. Maybe make a note of one or two things you might need to say or ask. That's it. It's very simple, but you have made yourself a queue. And when you repeat the same queue every time, what happens is whenever a meeting come up, automatically it triggers that short prep routine. And you're not scrambling or thinking, do I need to prepare it? But it's already decided. And because it's very small, literally like 2 or 3 minutes, you will actually do it. That's one example for Q. I'm going to give you one relatable another example so that which makes more sense to you. Like ending your workday. You can create like another queue. Last 10 minutes of my workday before logging off. What are the actions I would do? Like listing top 3 tasks for tomorrow, closing all the tabs except what I would need tomorrow, and then log out. So next day, what happens is this is saving some time and energy for you. You don't waste energy figuring out where to start. So this is how you actually build up queue. So here's the part people usually avoid. They think structure means rigidity, but it's not the case always. It just removes unnecessary decision making. So if your day feels messy, it's not because you have to do so much. It's because too many moments are very undecided, and that's where you have that unstructured way of day, and then you end up stressed and exhausted. Another strategy is aligning work with energy. So finally, after doing all these habitual routines and making yourself into that small changes and becoming more consistent, how you can align your work with energy. Because not all the hours of a day is equal. Some tasks might need more focus. Some are easier to do when you are tired. So instead of forcing everything into the same structure, you have to start noticing, when do I focus best? Or when am I more likely to get distracted? And then you adjust your work accordingly, because we are all individuals and we do work differently. For example, handling a report or any detailed task at work, which is something you need more accuracy about, not just the speed. So without aligning to that your energy, it might not work perfectly. So you keep postponing it because it feels like it can be very heavy, because it's something which needs more accuracy. So when you finally do it later in the day, or when you're tired, you might need more time, more energy. You might reread things, make small mistakes. You can lose your patience, and it takes longer than it should be. So with alignment, what you can do is like you can look yourself and see how your day goes and see, when is my high energy time. So during your high energy time, start and complete the thinking heavy part. Understand what is the requirement for this report, or structuring the report, or what is something key writing sections I can add into. So with your high energy, you would utilize like that. And your low energy time, do the lighter parts, like formatting or minor edits or proofreading or sending it out. So when you split your energy level like that and you align it to your work, You would figure out things more clearly with more clarity. So why this actually matters is you start with the hardest part, and it needs most of your mental clarity, and finishing is always the easier part. You can do it even when you're a bit tired. So these are actually not big changes, right? When you put it into theory and when you listen to all this, these are small adjustments in how we structure our work and how we respond to our environment. And over time, these can change our behavior. But here's the part people usually avoid. All these strategies, they reduce the risk of burnout. However, burnout is not something just about how you work. It's also about how much you're carrying and what you're tolerating. So you can be perfectly organized and still feel burnt out. If your workload is consistently too high, or you don't really take real breaks and you feel zero control over your day and you're constantly on without recovery, no productivity system is going to fix that. So you have to think it like this. These strategies, they can make my engine run more smoothly. Burnout prevention also needs not driving the engine nonstop. So if the engine runs all day without stopping, even at a steady speed, it still overheats. So eventually that is going to happen, right? So it's not just how smoothly it runs, it's a fact that it never gets a break. So at work, driving nonstop looks like jumping from one task to another with no real pause, working through your breaks or lunch, finishing work, but still thinking about the whole evening, saying just one more thing repeatedly. So even if you're organized and efficient, your brain is still continuously engaged. And that's the problem with the burnout. So what not driving nonstop means that in real practice, it's not just taking long vacation or being lazy. It's about built-in recovery during and after work. For example, after a mentally heavy task, take at least a short reset, even 5 minutes without screen. Between the blocks of work, pause instead of instantly switching into something else. During lunch, actually try to disconnect, not eat while working. End of the day, mentally close your work. Not just closing your laptop, but mentally close your work, not replay everything at night. Why this matters is that because your brain need that moment where it's not processing, it's not deciding, or it's not trying to respond. So without that, the stress hormones stay elevated and your focus can drop and small tasks can feel very overwhelming. That's when burnout really creeps in, and not from one bad day. It is because you're not having recovery over time. All these strategies and all these things we talked about, these can sound good. But you can still think, okay, my workplace is chaotic, or I don't have control over my environment. And that can be even very practical in our real life, right? That's a real situation. And I do agree with that. We don't always have that control over our environment. And what I focus is not changing everything, but identifying what is within our control. Even in a chaotic system I am in, what are the small adjustments, like how I sequence my task, how I check my emails, or how I start my day, can still shift my experience. So it's less about that controlling the system, but more about working more intentionally with it. And you can also think about the fact that, okay, is this just talking about time management? Yes, it does overlap there, but it's not the same, because the time management focuses on what you can do with your time, right? What we discussed today is more about why the behavior happens in the way we does. And most of the time we are aware of this, but we don't notice it. We don't take action on it, including our automatic patterns and environmental influence. Because even with a good time management plan, if those patterns are not understood, it's hard to follow through consistently. So how do you stay consistent with these changes? That is the real big question here, because consistency usually becomes difficult when we try to change too many things at once. That's why I clearly emphasized on the fact that you start small. So instead of changing everything, focus on one pattern. Notice that first, then adjust it slightly. When the change is small and realistic, it's much easier to sustain. And yes, sometimes we do know our own patterns, and sometimes we still don't change. That's very common. And awareness alone does not automatically change that behavior, but it creates opportunity to change it. So the next step you can usually you do when you understand these things is to look into and see what's reinforcing that pattern. Often it's the environment or the effort required to change it. So instead of forcing that change, we adjust the setup, make the desired behavior easier and the unwanted one harder. And yes, I keep saying that we have a lot of interruptions and distractions around us. And these are usually built into our system as well. So eliminating them completely is not something realistic, but we can reduce the impact it is creating in our structure. So for example, as I have given some examples, setting specific times to check your emails. These are some small interruptions. You can eliminate their impact. So it's about shifting from reactive to slightly more intentional control. So when we bring all this together, what we have talked today, it comes to the understanding that how we function and the environment we are in. So I want to take a moment to step back and look at what we actually explored today. We started with something very familiar, the gap between what we intend to do and what we actually end up doing in our workday. And instead of immediately trying to fix that gap, we took a step back to understand it. We looked at how a lot of behavior is not fully conscious. It's shaped by our patterns, habits, and repeated responses. And we also explored the environments we work in, which is not usually talked about. Always it's blamed into our own behaviors, right? But our systems, the expectations, and daily structure quietly influence these patterns, often more than what we realize. So when we bring these together, it shifts how we look at professional growth. It's no longer about pushing ourselves to do more or trying to be more disciplined. It becomes about understanding how we work both internally and externally, and recognizing that our behavior is the result of that interaction. And that's where self-awareness becomes very meaningful, not as a concept, but as a practice. So the ability to notice what patterns do I fall during my day? When do I feel more focused? When do I get pulled into reactive work? Or what is my environment in supporting me and what is working against me? Because when you start noticing these things, you are no longer just reacting to your workday. You're beginning to understand it. And that understanding will give you the ability to make small intentional changes. And those changes, as I keep saying, don't have to be big. They can be simple as adjusting how you start your day, reducing the small source of distraction, structuring your work a little differently, or aligning your task with your energy. But when these changes are based on awareness, they are much more likely to be more consistent and sustainable. So if there is one thing I would like you to take away from today is that professional growth is not just adding more skills or doing more work. It's more about understanding how you work and making that work for you. So as you go back to your work today, instead of asking how I can be more productive, maybe start with what are the patterns I'm already following and what is shaping them, because that awareness is where change begins and where you can be more effective, sustainable. So if you can take one thing from today, don't try to change everything at once. Start with, okay, tomorrow, notice one pattern in your workday, something you do automatically. Don't try to fix it immediately. Just notice it because that awareness is the first step to change it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. You actually answered one of the questions that there was. So that was great. Somebody had said, what are some key takeaways? But I definitely agree. You don't want to get overwhelmed and not do anything. So by starting off small is wonderful.
Okay.
Um, so one different question here was, how can individuals develop a growth mindset and cultivate resilience in the face of challenges such as setbacks in the workplace?
Okay, for me, one of the biggest shift was noticing how quickly I move into the reactive work, especially small tasks or emails. So I started structurally my day slightly different, like focusing on one task at a time before switching. I know it's not perfect, but even that small change made a difference in how I focused, felt. I think it connects back to how behavior is shaped by both looking at internally and the environment. And if you start looking at that, you can acknowledge and find a grounded answer for that.
Thank you. And I guess along the same kind of ideas is how can individuals who are struggling with their motivation or enthusiasm even begin to start anywhere? I know you say start small, but
Mhm.
sometimes it's just so hard to make that first step. I mean, it could be putting your phone in another room, but what would you
Yeah.
recommend?
Oh, yeah. I can totally relate to that. Sometimes we are like, I don't even have the energy to even start, right? So that's a really, really practical question. But because when motivation is low, even starting can feel very difficult. One thing I would say is don't start with motivation because motivation is not something which is always reliable. Instead, start with something very small and very clear, not the whole task, just the first step. For example, instead of thinking, I need to finish this, it might just be opening the document. Just open it. Just open it. That's the first thing you can do. And just write a first line for what you have to do. The goal at that point is not productivity. It's just getting started. And often, once you begin, the momentum builds naturally. But if it still feels difficult, it's also worth asking, is it a motivation issue or is it something else? Like, is it mental fatigue? Is it overload or even lack of recovery? Because in those cases, the solution is not pushing harder. It might actually be stepping back and resetting.
Hmm. Okay. I know I enjoyed how, sometimes I think that, you're falling behind, so you better work through your lunch or work extra hours or something, and it just seems to make you more tired. And if you would just, set a little timer for yourself and, get a breath of fresh air and then come back and start right away, you can be more productive in that sense. So I did find a lot of your little strategies. I'm thinking to myself, going, okay, I think I'm a pretty good multitasker, but maybe not now that I've listened to this. So I think I need to look at my day and my schedule and see, what I personally can do at my own desk or reassess things for myself. So I think that it's great for the attendees here that are alumni, but also even some of our students to help them through their programs that they're going through right now. So I think that's great information that you have given them today. Um,
Really glad you shared that because that's exactly the kind of awareness we are talking about. Because the moment where we pause and realize maybe this is not actually helping me, that's where the change starts, right?
yeah, it's great. Like I really feel like I've taken a lot away from this personally. So I'm hoping that other people also are able to get something out of this. I do have one other question that just came through, and it says, what are some ways that we can mentally turn off work at the end of the day?
Wow, that is a really good question. Mentally turn off work. We are not machines, right? We are humans. So,
Right.
yeah. So sometimes I can personally tell, sometimes I feel like my mind doesn't stop even after work ends. So that is where this all started, my research and everything. So because mentally switching off work can be harder than finishing the work itself. So one thing that helps is having a clear end of day transition, something small but intentional that signals to our brain because you can always train your brain and change things. So that's the most beautiful thing about our brain. So be intentional, signal to your brain that work is done. You can just say, it's almost like doing manifestation. tell it to your brain that when you're done with your work, say to yourself, okay, my work is done. It could be as simple as reviewing what you completed, noting that what you will do tomorrow, and then closing your laptop. So you're also putting some action. That will help reduce mental loop. Did I forget something? Another thing is creating small boundaries, like stepping away from your workplace or taking a short walk. Because without that transition, the brain is not registering that your workday has ended. And if thoughts still come up later, instead of trying to suppress them, it can help just note them down quickly, like journaling. I'm just connecting it to practical things you might hear in your daily life. So you can just write it down what is coming up in your mind and come and do it. This is the work for tomorrow. Give that cue to your brain, tell your brain this is for tomorrow, and your brain would listen. That's how our brain works because it's less about completely switching off instantly, more about gradually creating that separation.
I like how you have to separate things like you say, but like do definitive things, not like I have to close my office door. If I do not close my office door, I will go back into my office. So
Mhm.
those are things that, I do, but I like the idea of even going for a walk to completely change it, um, and change your mind. And I think it's interesting that your brain, you think, is in charge of everything, but yet
Oh,
we're telling it what to do and how to rethink things. So I think that that is also incredible, and to know that we can change things like that and change the pathways and neurons and all that.
yes. That's why I keep saying to my students too, you can always rewire your brain.
Hmm. I like that. I have to write that one down. Got the little inspirational things everywhere to remind myself, but I like that. Um, so just see if we have any other questions here. I don't think we do, but let's see. I believe that is all the questions that we have. So I want to say thank you so much for doing this talk tonight and teaching us so much. And some of it may have been a reminder, but yet there's always a little bit of something more to take away or something that we can improve on. And so thank you for bringing that to our attention again. And I also want to let everybody know that we will be having another alumni event in August where we will be learning more about behavioral skills training. And so thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and good night.